Hey guys, welcome back to the real Mr. Beer, Mr. Beer's own channel on Twitch TV. We're here to provide homebrewing guidance and tips, equipping you with all sorts of beer knowledge. Today, I'm going to be brewing a unhopped malt extract, and we're going to be doing a hop boil. There's a lot of different ways to brew, including the hop malt extracts, like our Mr. Beer and Cooper's products. They already have the hops in them, and they're pretty easy. Basically takes 15-20 minutes to make, and then you just let it ferment. With this kind of brewing, it's a little more complicated, but it's the middle step between going from hop malt extracts to all grain brewing. So before you jump into all grain brewing, it's good to go to this step next, because you start learning about hop additions, and once you know about hop additions, then you can start learning about mashing, sparging, and all of that kind of stuff. So today we're going to be brewing, I'm actually brewing the very first unhopped extract recipe I ever made. My first beer, I believe, was the sparkling ale from Cooper's, or it might have been the draft, I think. But that was the very first beer I made many years ago. And the next batch I wanted to do something a little more involved, so I learned how to do the hop additions. And this was when I started actually started getting in the business too, working in home brew stores and stuff, and so I kind of had a little bit of an edge in that respect, as far as people helping me out and having, employee discounts for all my ingredients. So this is going to take 2 of these cans. This is the Cooper's Malt Extract Light, where they also have an amber, dark, and a wheat. Remember, these do not have hops in them. It's just the extract. So this is basically what it is before they add the hops in our hot malt extracts. I'm also going to supplement it with a pound of dry malt extract to bring it up to my 5.2, about 5.5% mark. This beer is a pale ale. It's a very simple pale ale. One of the very first craft beers I ever drank was Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. It changed my life, literally. When I tasted, I wasn't really a beer fan. I wasn't into Miller, Bud, and all that stuff. But the flavors of Sierra Nevada, like those citrusy hops and the malt profile and just how much more body it had compared to all those adjunct lagers I'd been used to drinking, it changed me. So I wanted to recreate that beer. It was one of the first things I wanted to make. And remember, this was back before all these craft breweries were everywhere. The only craft breweries we really had were New Belgium, Sierra Nevada, Anchor Steam, if you really want to call them a craft brewery. And a few others, but it wasn't as prolific as it is now. In this batch, I'm going to be bittering with a little bit of Centennial, an ounce of Centennial hops. And I'm also going to be adding flavoring and adding aroma hops, and that's going to be Cascade. That's what Sierra Nevada uses in their beer. And for the yeast, I'll be using the Safale US05. And this is actually known as the Chico strain, and it was created by Sierra Nevada back in the late 80s, and went into the home brewing market in the early 90s, and it has been the most common brewing yeast for home brewers ever since, and it still is today. It's a very neutral, clean yeast. It's really great for pretty much any beer, but it's especially great for pale ales and IPAs, where you don't want a lot of yeast esters, and you want to kind of mute the malt a little bit so that your hops come forward a little bit more. That's what I love about this yeast. So first thing I'm going to do is throw my malt extracts in some hot water, let them cool down a bit, so that they come out a little bit easier and it's not so much like molasses. And today we're going to be brewing in the FastFerment. I know some of you guys have been requesting it, so we're going to be doing the big guy here. Well, this is the medium size. They also have a 14-gallon one. And we also have the 3-gallon ones, which we'll do a Mr. Beer kit in an upcoming episode in one of the 3-gallon FastFerments soon. Okay, so we've got a pot of water here. I already have it heated up. And what I'm going to do, go ahead and get my dry malt extract ready. You know what, I'm going to save this and just add 1 can. I'm going to add 1 can at first into the batch, and I'm going to save the rest for the very end of the boil. The reason for this is because malt extract, especially liquid malt extract, can caramelize in the boil. We're only doing, as opposed to an all grain batch where you'll be doing a full boil of 5 or 6 gallons, typically 6 gallons, so that you make up for the evaporation loss. In this batch, we're only going to be doing about a 2.5 to 3 gallon boil, and then we're going to add cold water later. Granted, that's not going to be enough cold water to cool down that wort like it would be in our little brown kegs. So we're going to be doing an ice bath as well. Okay, so I'll get to that in a moment, and we'll get these cans, one of these cans out, and we'll get that boil started. Okay. And notice I haven't really sanitized anything. That's because all this stuff is going into the boil. You're going to be boiling for 60 minutes. That's going to be sanitizing. This is what's called the hot side. You don't really have to sanitize anything on the hot side. Just make sure it's clean. It's the cold side, after the wort is chilled, where you want everything to be sanitized. Because that's when bacteria can get on all your stuff, and the heat's not there to kill it off. Alright, let's switch over to the pot. Now I heated this up already to boiling ahead of time. And we're just going to go ahead and throw this in here and dissolve it up. We're just going to add only 1 can for now. Because again, we don't want all of that malt in this concentrated boil to kettle caramelize. Because if you cook all this malt at once, you only need enough malt in there for your hops. Okay. Okay, you do need some malt in here for your hop oil, because the hop oils attach to the carbohydrates and the proteins and sugar molecules in the extract. So just boiling hops in water is not going to do anything. It's going to give you this grassy hop tea that won't contribute any bitterness or flavor to your batch. You need those bits of sugar for the hop oils to isomerize into the alpha acids, giving you your bitterness for balance or that bitter flavor for things like IPAs. Okay, just kind of want to scrape the bottom with your paddle or spoon, whatever you're using. Make sure it's clean, and it is. So we'll go ahead and turn this back on. Get this guy boiling again. Okay, while we're waiting on that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the hop break. And that's what we're waiting for right now, is a hop break. What a hop break is when it starts to foam up. It's a period that takes between 5 and 20 minutes, depending on your batch of beer, proteins, and all this stuff. So what happens is the foam will start to rise and form a smooth surface on the top of the wort. And of course, if this foam starts billowing over, that's called a boil over, and that's bad. One way I like to combat that is you can either just lower the heat, or you can use a little bit of water in a spray bottle and spray it, and it'll push that foam down a little bit. So the foam is caused by proteins in the wort that coagulate due to the rolling action of the boil. it'll continue to foam until the protein clumps get heavy enough to sink back into the pot. And so that foam, when it rises to the top from the boil and sits there for a bit. And once the rolling boil starts cracking through the foam, which you'll see on the camera once it starts, all of these, all that foam will start to coagulate and clump together. And it can kind of look like egg drop soup sometimes, depending on the beer you're making. If it's too dark, you won't be able to see it. But it's all these proteins coagulating together. And that hot break is necessary to allow all of these proteins to fall down at the end, so you can leave a little bit of that trube behind. That's going to be more common in all grain batches. You're not going to get a lot of trube, so you can typically just pour the whole wort into your fermenter. Again, it'll take about 15 to 20 minutes to occur for your hop break. Sometimes when you throw hops, the first hop additions will sometimes trigger a great deal of foaming. So it's usually necessary to wait until the hop break occurs during your first hop addition. So when that hop break is finished and you can add your hops, that's when you start your 60 minutes. A few extra minutes isn't going to affect your boil in any way. And as you can see, we do have some particles already starting to coagulate at the top here. These are all proteins that are broken up by heat, and they're lighter than all of the sugars around them. So they rise to the top with the boil, and then they start to coagulate and fall towards the end of your boil. Typically during flame out. And that's what a hot break is. And then there's your cold break, which we'll get into when we start chilling this batch. Any questions so far? So this beer is going to be, like I said, like Sierra Nevada. Because I'm using all liquid malt extract instead of dry malt extract, which is the way I did it the first time, it may be a little bit darker than normal, because liquid malt extract does sometimes come out a little bit darker. But also you can do these kinds of extract batches in your little brown keg or in the 3G FastFerment. You just got to cut everything basically in half, and your chilling will actually be a lot easier too, because you can do it like you would your regular 2-gallon batches of our hopped malt extracts. And the chat is there if anybody has any questions or comments or anything. And I can see the boil on my camera, so so I don't have to keep walking over there. Yeah, you can see all that foam starting to rise up a little bit more. It'll start to thicken up and become a whole surface, unless it boils pretty quick, because I did get this water heated ahead of time. Hot breaks are a lot more prominent. They're a lot more prominent with all grain brewing, like I said, because there's a lot more particulates from the grains that get through to your wort. Even when you do the Vorloff method, like if you want to know more about Vorloff method and the malting, we did do an episode last Friday on that. But even with all those methods, you're going to get a lot more trube in an all grain batch. With extracts, they filter out a lot of that stuff when they make the wort and evaporate it. So it's not really going to be as big of a deal, but you still will get a hot break. You'll get a hot break with the, you even get it with the Mr.Beer kits if you do the 5-minute boil or 10-minute boil using a little an LME or a DME. In some of our recipes, like our IPAs, you'll do a short boil for a little bit of extra bitterness. You'll get a little mini hot break there, and sometimes it will boil over, so you got to keep an eye on it. Okay, because we had a pretty small hot break from this, because I preheated all my water, it doesn't look like it's going to boil over, but I'm still going to keep an eye on it after this hop addition. Again, the oils and hops can really can really aggravate it and make it boil quite a bit. So as soon as you do your first hop addition, you want to make sure you keep an eye on it and make sure your temperature is correct, and you have a bottle of spray water handy so you can spray down that foam if you need to. There are a few products on the market that'll help, like Firm Cap and a few other things that'll help reduce the foam during your boil, but I don't really find them necessary unless you have you don't have a lot of headspace in your pot and you think you might have a boil over and you have like a lot of malt, and then you might want to consider it. But this is about a 5%, 5.5% beer, so it's not going to have a big gravity, so there's most likely not going to be any issue with the boil over, hopefully. Alright, so we're going to start our first hop addition and start the clock at 60 minutes. Okay, so this is the beginning of my hop schedule. This is going to be a 60-minute boil. A hop schedule is basically going to determine your bitterness. Oh, you can see that foaming up already. But it doesn't look like it's going to be a big deal. Okay, so hop schedule is going to determine the bitterness. If Matt can throw up that graph we have. You'll see that when you add your hops at 60-minute mark, that's when is it going crazy? I'm going to turn it down just in case. It is all the way up for this puppy to go. That looks like a good spot. All right, so if you can get that graph up, Matt. The hop boil is going to be 60 minutes in this case. And as you can see, there's a 60-minute mark, that red line. That's your bitterness. So the top of your the hour is going to be bitterness. So the longer you boil your hops, the more. Keep an eye on that boil. The longer you boil your hops, the more bitterness it's going to add. These bittering additions are not going to add any hop aroma or flavor. So if you just want a balanced beer, like some Hefeweizens and some German beers only have one single hop addition at the beginning, usually like Hallertau or Tettnang or something, and that's just to have bitterness to contrast with the sweetness of the malt, so that the beer doesn't just come out really sweet. If you didn't use hops in a beer at all, your beer would be very sweet tasting. So about 30 to 20 minutes, that's the blue line on the chart. That's going to be a lot of flavor, and you're not going to get a lot of the aromatic portions are going to be boiled out within that 20-30 minutes, and you're going to get some bitterness. As you can see, the red line is still kind of up in the 20-30% mark there between the blue line, but you're going to get mostly flavor at this point. And then after 15 minutes and beyond, you're not really going to you'll get maybe 10% bitterness, but the rest is going to be all aroma. The later you add your hop additions, the more aroma you're going to have. Now, while that flavoring happens in the 20-30 minutes, you can still get a lot of flavor from late addition hops and your dry hops too, but most of that's going to be aromatic. So let's see, what was I doing on this one? 40 minutes. So I'm doing a 60-minute bittering hop, and then I'm going to do a 20-minute cascade addition for flavor and a little bit of extra bitterness and aroma. And then I'm going to do a final flame out when I turn off the flame, addition of some more cascade. And that is a hop schedule. And you can tweak it all different kinds of ways. There are softwares like Beersmith that have, you input the IBUs of the hops you're using, and it'll figure out, the alpha acids and all kinds of things. There are charts online you can look at, and that's what the alpha acids, by the way, in the hops are what boil for that 60 minutes. They're not really the alpha acids aren't really. They don't add any flavor, aroma, just bitterness. So when you add them in later additions, they're not really gonna contribute anything. So if you're just adding hops for like aroma or a little bit of flavor, those alpha acids, you can just kind of ignore that. That percentage is really just for your early addition bittering hops. And in this case, I used Centennial bittering hops, about 10-11% alpha acid. For 60-minute, that brings me to about 40 IBUs. And then the 20-minute Cascade edition will bring me to about 45 IBUs, I believe. And then there's like 2 more points for that flame out edition. And even though that's flame out, there's still a little bit of heat. And as long as it's sitting in that heated wort, it'll add little small amounts of acids and bitterness to your beer. Some people like to chill their beer first and then add a late addition, and that's totally fine too. I just do flame out. I've always done it that way, and it comes out just fine. Let's give this a stir. Okay. Another thing I want to talk about is whether or not to cover your pot when doing your boil. Never cover your pot. If you must, like to try to keep, if you're outside brewing, trying to keep leaves or insects out, cover it partially. You want to let that steam come off. During the boil, there's a sulfur production that happens, and if you don't let that evaporate out during the boil, then it's going to become dimethyl sulfide, which will make your beer taste kind of like cooked cabbage or creamed corn. It's not a good flavor, and it can make your beer also kind of like wet, grassy flavored, like hay-like. It's disgusting. So never ever cover your pot. Always keep it open for a nice evaporation. In fact, Pilsners, if you're doing all grain batch and you're doing mostly Pilsner malt is pretty notorious for dimethyl sulfide, unfortunately. So typically, and it creates a lot of dimethyl sulfide, so you have to do typically a 90-minute boil instead of a 60-minute boil to drive off all that DMS. We don't see a lot of chatter in the chat. Does anyone have any questions or comments right now? Because we're going to be here a while for this boil.
No hop sack?
Oh, really? I don't know why I can't see the chats.
Yeah, yours. Yeah.
Let me refresh my page. Yeah, no, I don't use a hop sack. Typically, when you're doing larger batches, especially in the FastFerment, I'm going to be using the FastFerment, which, as you can see, is a conical fermenter, and so all of the true and the hops that you put in there are going to fall down to here. Some of them get stuck along the side here or whatever, but it'll all fall down in here, and then you just get rid of that after about 5 days or so. And I'll show you all that stuff when we start filling the FastFermenter up. Was that the only question? I just read.
One person says, sounds like the hop rack is similar to what happens with boiling pasta or reducing stock.
Yes, exactly. You do actually have a hop break when boiling pasta or some stocks too. It's the proteins that do that, and pasta the gluten is a protein, and that's gonna cause the hop breaks. Yeah, it's common with cooking too. Absolutely. Oh, now I can see the chat. Hey, helping you out. How's it going? Welcome back. All right, we got a nice little boil there. And tomorrow we're going to be doing a similar show, but it's going to be more advanced. It's also going to be a boil. Of course, I'm going to have that halfway done because I want to get to the end part. So tomorrow's going to be the third part in our all grain series. The first episode I did the mash. I showed you how to mash your grains to create the sweet wort. And then the second episode last Friday was lautering, which is separating the wort from the grain. And then tomorrow we're going to be doing, since we have the wort separated from the grain, we're going to be doing the boil. I'm not going to do the whole long boil because there's a lot of stuff after that, so I'm going to start the show probably halfway through our boil. So I pretty much got through all the hop schedule today. I'll probably throw up the chart again tomorrow and touch on it again while we're waiting for things to happen briefly for people who weren't here. But I'm going to get into more of the advanced stuff tomorrow, maybe touch more on the chemicals and a little bit more about alpha acids and cohumulones and the things that actually cause bitterness and perceived bitterness. And we're going to be talking about chilling the beer. Today we're going to be chilling it a bit differently than tomorrow. Today we're just going to be doing a simple ice bath, which is what a lot of home brewers can easily do. Tomorrow we're going to be doing a little bit more advanced method with a wort chiller, which is a copper tubing. It's going to be this guy right here. And we'll go over different types of chillers, including wort chillers, plate chillers, counterflow chillers. And different methods of chilling. So tomorrow's going to be kind of similar to today in that we're doing both a boil and a chill. But today's the medium, the intermediate way of doing it. And tomorrow's going to be the more advanced way of doing it. Helping out says, the big burners today, huh? Yeah, I love those burners. They work so great. I can't believe how fast they boil water in such a short period of time. One thing to consider when doing these batches, I put about 3 gallons of water in there. When this is done boiling, there'll probably be about 2.5. So I'll have to add 2.5 gallons back to make the full 5 gallons because there is an evaporation loss during your boil. When you're doing 90-minute boils for like Pilsners, there's going to be even more evaporation loss. So sometimes you need to add a little extra water at the beginning to make up for that. There are calculators available online and in softwares like Beersmith and QBrew that can help calculate how much water you're going to need for your evaporation loss depending on the size of your pot. So that's all extra advanced stuff too. And I actually want to do a future episode kind of going through Beersmith because we do sell that on our website. It's a really great program. I highly recommend for doing extract and all grain batches, partial mash batches. It's got all kinds of tools. It's the only tool you'll ever need for brewing ever again. It's really amazing. Okay, and what's the time on that? That was about 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago? Yeah, it was 10 minutes. Okay. Any of you guys from the forums on here today? Go ahead and chime in the chat if you are. Russ25 says, what if this rookie covered his boil pot? Is there a way to counter the result? My batch is still in fermentation. There's not really a way to remove DMS. It's pretty much when it's there, it's there. Typically, if you age the beer, it might reduce a little bit, but there's no guarantee you got DMS. It really depends. Was this an all grain batch or was it an extract batch? Because it's really going to be more common with all grain batches because of the I guess juices you could say from the husks that are still in there, and particulates from the husk matter. So it was extract. What kind of beer was it? Because you probably don't have to worry about it too much with an extract batch. But for the future, you really don't want to have a lid on your pot. Now, if it was like a really light blonde ale or pale ale or something like that, you may have an issue with the flavor. But if it was something a little more robust, ooh, yeah, that could be an issue, being a Czech Pils, especially when those Pilsner malts can be notorious for DMS. But typically with the extract, when they make that, I think they pretty much can. I don't know how they would get the sulfur out of there, but I still say it's not a good idea, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. If it did happen, then it probably won't be that bad. Honestly, with the cream corn flavor in there, it might taste a little bit more like a cream ale or an American adjunct lager. But I wouldn't stress about it too hard. Just in the future, don't cover your boil pot. Okay, so I've pretty much got everything ready. These fast ferments, we sell them on our website. These big ones, I do want to point out, they don't come with the stands. You have to buy the stands separately. What they do have is these little notches here on either side, and they come with these brackets that you actually attach to a wall. So you could mount this like to a wall if you wanted to, and then take it off. You can have like a whole line of them mounted up, or you could just use the stands. My stand's got a handy little carrier, so you can lift it up when it's full, although it does get stuck on the tap. And another thing about these, when you buy them from us, they don't come with these spigots, and the hole's not even drilled. You have to drill it yourself. When you buy the whole kits, they come with the bit and the spigot. The reason they do this is because some people just use these for wine, and some people use them for beer. If you're using it for wine, you can have that spigot a little bit lower, because beer is going to create a lot more trub than wine does. In wine, it's called lees instead of trub. So you can have that a little bit lower. You can put it wherever you want on there. So they give you that option to either have it or not have it. It's not required for bottling. I don't use this for bottling because there's a separate attachment at the bottom for bottling. This is basically for like tasting or taking hydrometer samples. And the big ones come with thermo wells with a removable thermometer, but our small 3-gallon fermenters do not have thermo wells on them. And both of those are available on our website. The company that manufactures these also does a 15-gallon one too, which are pretty nice. I've been thinking about picking one up myself. And yeah, the blog Matt shared there is pretty handy. I wrote that a couple years ago, and it's still a great resource if you want to kind of learn a little bit about hops. We have on our community forums, which I recommend joining if you're not already a member. If you scroll down below the screen, our community, click there and register and join. We have all kinds of different topics, thousands and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of posts. We have a lot of active members. I'm sure some of them are here in the chat. They're just being pretty quiet today. It's a really great resource. I recommend joining it. I'm pretty active on there. Tim, who does our beginner shows on Tuesdays, is pretty active on there. So I highly recommend it. And let's check out this boil. I don't know if you can see on the camera, but you can see about an inch of space there that we've lost in evaporation already. You just want a nice rolling boil, vigorous, but not too vigorous to where it's going to boil over or evaporate too much, but not too little either, like it is now, because you need to drive off all of that DMS and all those other things that you're trying to get rid of during the boil. Now with that said, I want to talk a little bit about no boil beers, and these are pretty rare, and they're typically historical styles like Satis, or Norwegian farmhouse beers. I recently did one myself as an experiment. It came out great, and I was concerned about DMS, but I guess it wasn't really a big deal in this case. But basically, these are like historical beers where they didn't boil it; they just made the wort, and then they added all their ingredients for everything. The hops, like they would typically bitter with different things like juniper and things like that, so they didn't really use hops, so they didn't really have a need for a hop boil. So I did one. It was a Norwegian farmhouse style using a quake yeast. It's spelled K-V-I-E-K. I'll type that in chat. Or it might be E-I-K. I can't ever remember. But it's a Norwegian yeast strain that is that's starting to get pretty prominent these days because of how how versatile it is, and it can be dried really easily. A good friend of mine actually just made one with a yeast that was found in this guy's basement after 25 years in Norway, and they were able to reinvigorate it and get it back into use. So some of these beers like Satis, they don't have a boil, and it's really interesting. And they actually you do get some of that vegetable kind of note from the DMS, but with like all the other ingredients like junipers and things like that, it works. In fact, the beer that I did was based on a recipe where instead of a false bottom in their mash tun, they used juniper boughs. You know, the trees and branches, or the branches and leaves and berries of a juniper tree, use that as their filter bed. And that also offered some extra flavor and stuff. And I attempted one with juniper berries and some smoked malt and no boil, and it actually came out pretty good. I was really surprised. So yeah, you don't have to boil it, I guess, you know, but the thing is if you you do have to kind of sanitize it. If you don't boil it, you're not going to have a stable beer, and it has to be consumed pretty quick. That brings me back to hot break. Another thing about hot break, why you should do that and why you should do a boil, is because it helps eliminate chill haze, and also the cold break, which I will get to in a moment, will also eliminate chill haze. I have a whole thing on that. We'll wait to get to that. All right, we're at about 20 minutes on this. I might even shorten this boil a little bit, and it'll lower my IBUs, but for the sake of time for this episode, because this is just mainly for the show, I'll probably add these hops a little early. We'll give it another 10 minutes. Kev 840, does it taste like gin with the juniper? It did kind of have that kind of ginny, juniper-y flavor. It wasn't really overwhelming. I imagine if I had used actual boughs from the juniper tree, it would be different. And from what I was reading, the gin flavor is one thing, but you also will get a woody flavor from the juniper wood too. So that's something that I think I was missing. So if I try to do that batch again, I'm probably going to do it more traditionally and try to actually get some juniper boughs to use as my false bottom for the grain. What I did, I actually did juniper berries, crushed them up. I put them in the mash because since there's no boil, I figured that was going to be the best way to do it. And I also added a little bit of hops in the mash too, just to get a little bit of bitterness. Mr.Beer, we carry the Cooper's LME. We do carry the Cooper's LME over on our Cooper's website. But keep in mind, we will be merging those Cooper's products onto our site soon. That is one of the things we have planned. So you will be able to pick it up on our Mr. Beer site rather than having to go over to the Cooper's site. By the way, our LMEs, the soft packs, it's the same malt. The pail is the same as this pail that I'm brewing today. So I guess you could buy a whole bunch of LMEs, but you know that would add up. It's cheaper to just buy them by the can. And it's basically the packaging on those LMEs that would cost more. Ooh, I'm going to turn that boil down just a little bit. Get vigorous. That's the wrong way. Fortunately, I didn't have to use my water spray on the foam today. It's kind of like a cat you're trying to get off the counter. Get down, foam. Get down. Today I'm using the Cascade Cryo hops because you get a little bit more bang for your buck. These cryo hops, unlike regular pellet hops, they freeze the hop flowers, and then they use a supercritical extraction while they're really frozen to push all the oils and the powders and stuff out. So as you can see, they look just like regular hop pellets, but a little bit darker green because they're more of a powder. What I like about these, they break up into just a powder. There's not really any vegetable matter in them, so they give a really great flavor, and they still have those original oils from when it was fresh. So it's almost like having fresh hops all the time. You probably find these in your local homebrew shop. We just got some in for kind of a test market for our store. If they're popular and people want them, we'll see about carrying them on our site too. Because I think these would actually work better for our Mr.Beer kits for some of the recipes because of the fact that there's not a lot of vegetable matter in them. And you use half, 1 ounce is equal to a half ounce. So a half ounce of our the half ounce increments for our kits would only be like a 1/4 ounce. And they have a little bit longer shelf life too, I believe. All right, and can you link the Cooper site too, Matt?
Sure. Just the homepage, or?
Yeah, just the Cooper's DIY page, US DIY. Matt's going to link you the Cooper's DIY page so you can take a look at the extracts. It'll be under the, I think, the brewing extracts section.
I'll go to that page, actually.
Yeah, you just go right to the page. And then you can see where, and we do fulfill those orders. That Cooper's is the same as us. It's we fulfill all the orders from our warehouse. It's just our other website for Cooper's stuff. Stir. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and split up these hops. I'm just going to kind of eye these. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Now I'll have to get Matt. I'll have to have you go grab some ice here in a bit. Not now. It'll be a while. But I forgot to grab the ice from the clean room.
Where is it, in the clean room?
Yeah, in the freezer in
yeah.
the clean room. Oh, and we're getting a little bit of
Yeah, it's good.
how's that look? It's a little better. It's moving back that camera a little bit because it's getting foggy. That's good. You get a little better view of our burner too. Those are the Avantco induction burners. They're really great. You can't use them with every pot though. Your pot has to be made of a ferrous material. In other words, it has to be magnetic. If your pot is not magnetic, then it won't work on an induction burner. So if you are thinking about picking one up and your pot is aluminum or another type of steel that's not magnetic, you might want to consider picking up a new pot too. Can you grab me 2 bottles, the Gallic bottles, out of the chest freezer there? I might need the 3rd later, depending on the evaporation. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add my next hop addition. Now there are products on the market, if you don't get the correct amount of bitterness, because I'm going to cut this short for the show, I don't want to be boring you guys for an hour just watching wort boil. There are products called there's an Unhopped extract, and it's this extract that you can add a little bit to your wort after it's done to get more bitterness, and that's all it adds is bitterness. There are also extracts like terpene extracts you can add to add extra flavor. This is actually getting a little bit more prevalent on the market as they're starting to learn how to isolate terpenes out of hops. So it's starting to get more scientific, and pretty soon people are going to be making beer in laboratories and stuff. I mean, they pretty much are already. GMO yeast and all this other stuff. Okay, so we'll do this one. We'll say 5-minute boil on this. Then we'll do our flame out hop addition, and then we'll start getting on the chilling. Matt, can you go grab that ice?
Is it in a bag or?
Yeah, it's in a bag in
Just
the.
one bag?
Yeah, in the clean room.
Yeah.
Matt's going to be grabbing the ice. Then we'll start going about the cold break. I'm going to talk a little bit about that right now. So at the end of your boil, you need to cool your wort quickly. This is why with our Mr.Beer kits, we tell you to do the cold refrigerated water to pour the wort in, and then top it off with more cold refrigerated water. The reason for this is because when it's really hot, bacteria and wild yeast are inhibited. But 140 degrees, very susceptible to oxidation as it cools. So if you let it cool really slowly, then it could oxidize your beer, make it darker. Then there's the previously mentioned sulfur compounds that evolve from the wort while it's still hot. If it's cooled slowly, the dimethyl sulfide will continue to be produced in the wort without being boiled off. So even though you did a full boil, if you're letting it sit there while it's warm, it's still going to continue to create those sulfur compounds while it's slowly cooling. And that causes your off flavors in the finished beer. So the objective is to rapidly cool the wort to below 80 degrees before oxidation or contamination can occur. Rapid cooling also forms the cold break. And this is like the hot break, it's composed of another group of proteins that need to be thermally shocked into precipitating out of the wort. Let me just stick it in the sink, let it sit there. I'll pop it in. Where was I? All right, the cold break is just like the hot break, where it's proteins that need to be thermally shocked to coagulate so that they precipitate down to the bottom. Slow cooling won't create that. You need that cold break because you want to prevent chill haze. Chill haze is when the beer is chilled for, when you chill your beer for drinking, some of these proteins partially precipitate, forming a haze, and as the beer warms up, the proteins redissolve. Only by rapid chilling from near boiling to room temperature will those cold break proteins permanently precipitate and not cause chill haze. So say if you made a lager or a pilsner and you put it in your refrigerator, or like a pale ale is a better example because you don't really get that with lagers and pilsners too much. Say you made a pale ale and you put it in your refrigerator. It was clear before you put it in your refrigerator, but you put it in your refrigerator and then it gets cold and those proteins recoagulate, and that's called chill haze, and it makes it hazy. That's what that is. So if you're ever wondering what happens to your beer when it was clear at first but then gets hazy when it's cold, that's chill haze. So that's why it's important to now chill haze isn't really, it's mostly a cosmetic problem. It's not, you can't taste it. However, it does indicate that an appreciable level of cold break type protein is in the beer, and this can be linked to long-term stability problems. In other words, hazy beer will become stale much sooner than non-hazy beer. So the hazier your beer is, the sooner it can spoil. So typically that's why a lot of Hefeweizens and those hazy IPAs should be consumed fresh. Otherwise, they don't have the stability of beers that have been clarified and crashed and don't have all those proteins in them that can affect the whether the beer stales or not. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and just do one more addition and turn this off. Get our ice ready. to add these at the end of the boil. Otherwise, that's going to be a weak beer. You can get this one dissolved first and then add the second liquid. Alright, I'm going to grab my whisk for this part. DME can be a pain to break up sometimes, but you've got a trusty whisk, it breaks up pretty easy. Again, these are late malt additions because I didn't want to add it at the beginning because that 60-minute boil will darken it, and that's kettle caramelization, and you don't want to darken your beer up too much. So when you're doing extract batches like this, partial boils, you only want to add partial mash, or partial malt, I'm sorry. Now, I've used other malts, Grease malt, Muntins from the UK, and I'm not just saying this because I work here, but I really do find Coopers to be much higher quality. It tends to be fresher. Muntins I always find to be kind of stale and old, and I think it's because it's from the UK, it might be sitting on packaging ships for a long time. But since we're owned by the Coopers company, we get our malts a little fresher, I think. I do like Grease malt. It's pretty good stuff. Okay, make sure all those last particles of dry malt are dissolved up in there. Probably should have added those hops after I did this, but no big deal. I will share this recipe later on our forum as well. I'll put it up on our Twitch stream thread on our community forums. Can you link to our community forums, Matt? I know the link's just under the screen, but I just want somebody so that way you can like copy and paste and save or bookmark if you need to. Okay, let's get this started. Start getting some cold water in here. Okay. All right. Now this part you're not really going to be able to see too much of, but it's pretty easy to figure out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on this for now to prevent any ice from going in the pot. And tomorrow we'll have a camera set up over here so you can see the wort chiller and you can see all this stuff a little more close up. Okay. All right, some ice cold water. Just up to the beer level. And we're going to grab our thermometer. And it does help to stir this as it's chilling so that you get the beer touching on all the sides of the wall where the cold water is, so you get that heat exchange. You try and get this down to 80 degrees. It's ideal to really get down to about 70 or so for pitching your yeast, but this Saffield Chico strain, you can pitch at 80 degrees. It's a really great yeast, and it won't affect your beer in the long run if you do that. And since this is only about a 2.5 gallon batch, you can add some cold refrigerated water. If you're using a larger pot, which I was considering doing, but I decided not everybody has a larger pot, so they can't always do this. If you're using a larger pot and you have enough headspace, you can do your full 5 gallons, just to add those extra 2 gallons of cold water. I don't think I can't fit 5 gallons in this, so I'm just going to add as much as I can and then chill the rest in the fermenter with the last gallon. The faster you can chill your wort, the better. It's splashing good. A little slower. Try not to splash too much. You don't want to splash your hot wort because you get what's called hot side oxidation. Hot beer can become oxidized much easier than cold beer or cold wort. Because I don't have a valve on this, and there's no way I'm lifting this pot out to pour it into the small mouth of the fermenter, I'll be using an auto siphon to do that. And I'll show you how that's done in a moment. Once this thing's chilled. I like to stir it a bit. Get a nice little whirlpool going on it so that the beer is moving. And speaking of whirlpool, at this point you could add more hops, and this would be called a whirlpool edition. And I will be doing that on tomorrow's show, so we'll talk about that then. This is just the more simple method for middle of the ground. You know, people want to get up into doing larger batches and adding their own hops instead of using the hopped malt extracts. But again, this takes a while, so even though I do this kind of brewing and all grain brewing, I also still use Mr.Beer products when I just want to make a quick beer for family events, friends, things like that. Because they come out just as good. And you just want to keep this whirlpool going while you're doing this. And then put your lid back on. Let's see what our temperature is. See, we're already down to 120 from almost 220 boil just in a few minutes. And another thing, tomorrow with the camera on it, you'll be able to actually see how it looks like egg drop soup. It won't do it in this because it's an extract batch and doesn't have all those particles from the grains still in there, but I really implore you to join us tomorrow because I'm going to get a little more detailed on all of this stuff, and we'll have a little bit better camera shots. And we get the whirlpool going the other way now. A little more water in here too. here in Arizona, you got to check that tap water temperature because already it's like 80 degrees. In the summers, it can be a pain for us getting cold water out of the tap. That's impossible. Sometimes it's hotter out of the cold tap than it is out of the hot tap.
So true.
Oh, let's put it back on. Okay, so once it gets down to about 110, we'll go ahead and put it in the fermenter because that last gallon of water should get us down to exactly, well not exactly, but probably about 80 degrees. Being a little overconfident here. Alright, I'll get my airlock together. So this fermenter, like some of the bucket fermenters and carboys and such that we use airlocks. We don't really use these on our little brown kegs because they have notches underneath that allow CO2 to escape. Also, they usually take up space. I think we used to have them before on our pilot systems, but you know, with that height on them, they do take up more space. And one of the points of the little brown kegs is to be able to make beer without a lot of time or a lot of space. Things like this definitely take up a lot of space, so you got to either have the space, and the the ambition to get into bigger batches like this. So this goes on my lid. And these airlocks are pretty simple. It's 3-piece. One piece on the inside. This is your bubbler, and so it's got little tabs there to allow the CO2 to come out. And then you fill it up to the line with water, and that little thing kind of floats, and then it bubbles the CO2 out. Some people like to use these as a measurement tool for when they think their beer is done, and that's just not accurate at all, and I tell people not to do that. All it does is it bubbles and allows CO2 to escape without letting bugs or oxygen to get in. That's its only function. It's an airlock. Using it, by like counting the seconds between the bubbles, which some people have been doing, that's completely inaccurate because of the fact that CO2 can still off-gas long after fermentation is done. And also, depending on the amount of malt you have, the gravity of your beer, that time can completely vary. So it's not a measurement it's not a tool for measuring, it's just an airlock. Oh wow, we're already at 100 degrees. So we'll go ahead and put this in the fermenter. Grab my auto siphon. Now this is one of my favorite tools in brewing. Everybody should have one if you're using buckets. You can use just a racking cane. Some people use these and then like siphon with their mouth, but obviously that's not sanitary. So I like these racking canes. It's basically a pump. And so you put it in your fermenter, your pot, or whatever, and then you pump it, and it has this little nub on the end here that prevents anything from getting into it. So if you have a little bit of tube, that kind of prevents all of that from getting in. So I'm going to go ahead and sanitize this guy real quick since I did not do so beforehand. And I'm just using a Star San water solution. Let's not do that. Over here. So this is a food grade Star San water solution. Doesn't have to be rinsed, just like our no-rinse cleanser. I just like to run a little through my line. And try to spray the hose down as much as possible. It actually works a little better if you just do this in a separate bucket with sanitizer. set this in here. So we want to raise this up a little bit higher so we have more gravity to feed it down. Also, so you can see how it works. There we go. Perfect. Now, while that's filling up, I can also add this last. Well, I'll wait till it fills up. I want to see where I'm at. And then I'll add this last gallon, and then we may need to top up with a little more. I do have another gallon there. Good. Of course, just like with any fermenter, you want to do a water test on this and make sure it's not leaking. These things pretty much don't leak. There are connections that are semi-permanent that you use plumber's tape to put on and tighten. I do recommend switching that plumber's tape out every 10 batches or so, just to be sure it's going to always be nice and tight. Watertight, or beer tight rather. And once this gets down a little lower, then I can just go ahead and pour it directly in. Probably grab my big funnel and sanitize it. And these things do come in different sizes. They have little mini ones for like 1 gallon batches. Let's see if I have one. Yes. So we got these little baby ones. They're cute. And then they have extra large ones for doing like really big batches, or doing big batches of wine. Okay. Now these are 7.9 gallons. They're intended for 5 or 6 gallon batches, but you get all of that extra headspace, so you never really have any worries about fermentation overflows from high krausen. Get it going. Okay, we're about ready to use the funnel here. And feel free to ask any more questions if you guys got them, or discuss stuff among yourselves. It's been a pretty quiet chat. Unless my chat's not working again.
No, it's quiet.
Okay. That's fine. I'm sure everybody's just listening and watching. I'm okay with that. Okay. Alright, get our sanitizer funnel. And again, I'm sanitizing everything that's touching the beer after the hot side. This is called the cold side, so. Looks like my screen froze. Is the fast fermenter difficult to clean? It is a little bit more difficult to clean than like your typical 5-gallon bucket, but it's easier to clean than a carboy. I'll tell you that. Those can be very difficult to clean without a special curved brush to get in there and clean the shoulders. You get hop particles up there. They can be very difficult to get off. But I like this. I think it's a lot easier to clean than a carboy because you can take the bottom junction off, clean out all that, then clean the inside. You can put your whole arm in there, which is nice, which you can't do with a carboy. So yeah, I'd say it's pretty easy to clean. Okay, go ahead and dump this guy. Very slowly. It's not splashing too much. Right down the hatch. Alright, try to leave some of the particles behind. I did scorch a little bit, as you can see on the bottom there. Let me get some of that. It wasn't too bad. It didn't actually scorch. That's just a little bit of leftover malt that got stuck on the bottom. Good, I was hoping I didn't scorch. Yeah, that last little thin layer is going to be trub that you can leave behind. In an all-grain batch, which you'll see tomorrow, that's going to be a much thicker layer of trub because of all the grain sediment and everything. Reload my page again. All right, so let's see where we're at here. Just short of the 5-gallon mark. Perfect. Now, the 5-gallon, these marks do take into account the amount of wort that's in the collection jar at the bottom. So if you have that valve closed and it's not filling the collection jar, that's not going to be accurate. And I just want to double check my temperature. Make sure we're safe to add that yeast. I'll let that float there for a second. It's a floating thermometer, which is nice. And another thing I wanted to do is a hydrometer sample. Make sure that's mixed pretty well before you do this, so you're not just getting wort on the bottom and water on top. And now, because this is kind of warm still, and these hydrometers are rated at 60 degrees, it's going to be inaccurate, so you'll have to do some calculations to figure out the exact gravity. So, I'll get this thing open. There we go. What's faster is a refractometer, where it doesn't matter the temperature, and you don't need a whole sample wasting your beer. You just need a drop. Make sure that covers the plate completely. Nice, that's actually a little bit higher gravity than I wanted, but who's complaining about that? That means a little higher alcohol, all right? So I'm gonna go ahead and put this on the thing. Can you see that, Matt?
A little bit, yeah. You actually, no, a little bit more that way. Right there. A little closer to the, yes. There you go. A little more up.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see there's a little gauge in there, and it uses light refraction to tell your gravity. These are not very accurate for like final gravity, because the alcohol that was created in the beer can throw off the accuracy, but there are calculators online again that you can use to figure all that stuff out. Alright, again, you only need a drop, so that's pretty cool, and it doesn't matter what temperature it is. Okay. Now, check our temperature on here. 80 degrees. Perfect. Oh, one thing I want to show you before I add the yeast. Sometimes, especially when you're doing large batches with a lot of hops in them, like big IPAs, like our American Resolution IPA that we had recently, the area between the pull this back a little bit so you can see a little better. The area between the collection jar and the fermenter can sometimes get clogged. So when you take off that first, when you close the valve and pull off your tube and dump it out, and you put that back on and open the valve, sometimes it won't, it's clogged, so that beer won't get in there. So what I do is I take a sanitized racking cane. You can also use, hosing, a nice rigid hosing, or even a coat hanger that's sanitized, and just kind of stick it in there, down into that hole. Usually if it's something with a hole like this, then that gives that kind of air, so it kind of, brings all that beer in and fills it up. So that's been one of the only issues of FastFerment that I've found, is that sometimes that really narrow space can get kind of clogged. Kev 840, why is it not good to put the sample back in the fermenter? Can you do it if you sanitize? You can, but that little sample that you just poured in there and then you're pouring back, that picks up oxidation that can spread into your beer. So it's just not good practice. I mean, any brewery, any home brewer, they typically don't do it. It's not good practice, but you can. I mean, if you're really trying to save as much beer as possible, I say go for it, but it's just not something you should do. Sanitize my scissors before I open this yeast. And these yeasts are good for up to 6 gallons. You don't need a starter with them. Dry yeast is like 450 billion cells or something like that, whereas liquid yeast is typically from 150 to 250 billion cells. So you never really need a starter with these. You don't even really need to rehydrate them. The only reason you would want to rehydrate them is if it's an older yeast, it's coming close to the best by date or is just past the best by date, and you want to make sure it's still viable. You'd rehydrate it in a little bit of wort, a little bit of extract with some water, or even just a little bit of sugar water will work too. But it's best to use some wort. That way they're already getting acclimated to the environment they're about to be in. No need to stir. You want to keep them towards the top so they have access to that available oxygen. You do want to stir before you add it in to get a little bit of aeration in there. There's a difference between aeration and oxidation. Aeration will add a little bit of oxygen, but you're kind of just stirring it inside, and you're not bringing oxygen in. You're aerating the oxygen that's already within the wort. That's what I'm trying to say. You're not introducing oxygen from outside. You're aggravating the oxygen that's in the wort so that the yeast can have that available to use. Okay, yeast is added. Screw our top on. Sometimes you gotta screw it one way to get it to set. There we go. And then screw it close. Nice and hand tight so that the airlock will work. And we'll go ahead and set this aside with the rest. And that is my take on a Sierra Nevada clone. It's not quite a Sierra Nevada clone. It was just, I made with what I had at the time. Came out excellent. I was super, super proud that I made like my very first beer. I mean, the Cooper's Sparkling was my first beer, but when you get involved in the boiling and all that kind of stuff, the more involved you get, and the better it comes out, better tasting it comes out, the more confident you get, and the more stoked you get about it. So you want to do it more, which is why I'm where I am today. That first batch really did it for me. Okay, sure, it wasn't if there was a reason other than sanitation. Oxidation makes sense. Yeah, and even then, you know, that's probably arguable. It may not add as much oxygen as I'm, you know, claiming it does, but I've never actually tested it. It's just I've always learned from, you know, other brewers, you know, don't put the sample back. It's bad practice. But you can if you wish. I do know some brewers that do. I think if you're doing like a 10, 15 gallon batch, I think that's okay, because you're not, that little tiny bit of oxidation is not going to affect a batch that large. It's mainly, you know, the smaller the batch, especially with the little brown keg, the 2 gallon batches, you probably don't want to do that, which is why I recommend the refractometers, which we also sell on our website. Can you put that up, Matt? But while he's putting that up, I'm going to go ahead and I guess we're going to start closing out because we're pretty much done for the day. Again, join us tomorrow. We're going to be going over a similar topic. It's going to be a boil, but we're going to be mostly through the boil. I do want to show you the cold break on that. We'll see. I might even get a separate smaller boil just to show you a really vigorous hot break and show you what a boil over looks like. We'll get a little boil, get some extract going in that. I don't know, we'll figure it out. But yeah, we're going to talk about the end of the boil for all grain, doing a whirlpool, and also doing chilling with a wort chiller and how that's done. And you'll be able to see visually what a cold break looks like, which is pretty cool. It kind of looks like weird, like aliens, like jellyfish or moss or something, and then it's crazy how it coagulates and looks like egg drop soup. That's the best way I can really describe it. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for joining me today. I will see you again tomorrow. Go to the very bottom of the page and check out our community, or scroll up. I think Matt put that up earlier. I highly recommend registering. We have a lot of guys on there that are really helpful, really good guys. They're here on our watching our streams quite a bit. In fact, I'm going to Munster, Indiana this weekend to meet up with a few of them. So that's something we might spread out there too, to try to get some more people there. But again, join us again tomorrow. Hit the follow button at the top if you haven't already. And if you subscribe, you do the $4.95 subscribe, or buy some bits and donate them to us. Any kind of money, we don't make money off that. We don't profit off that. That's going to go to the Southern Arizona Humane Society. So it is a good and you also get some extra little emoticons you can use in the chat and stuff. So and we'll probably have some more perks coming up soon as we get more viewers, more followers, and subscribers. So anyway, I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for joining us.